which I, in sort of kind of pain, write about that is this context of, okay, is meaningful human control, is having a human always check the decisions of the robot, or sort of the autonomous weapon system, is that sort of possible? And one response is that, well, it's not really practically possible, in the sense that you get these normal accidents that emerge in a system, but also it might not be sort of militarily viable, in the sense that if I have an AI-controlled air superiority fighter and you have one, and sort of you've made your aircraft completely autonomous, then having a human operator green light every sort of launch decision in my plane is just not going to be able to compete with your plane. And so that creates a sort of security dilemma where, even though we would prefer sort of to keep our systems with a human in the loop, we know that if you take out the human and make them fully autonomous, you're completely going to defeat our systems. And so therefore we have an incentive to at the very least, make sure our systems have a fully autonomous mode, and if possible, sort of develop them to be able to switch to that more quickly. But I think, for the rest, you named a lot of the problems. I think one other thing is the in the sharing, sort of the organizational secrecy and sharing sort of information with other parts of the government or other states. It's sort of a mixed record, where in many cases the default for military organizations is, of course, their secrecy and not sort of exchanging these types of best practices. There are exceptions. So I believe after Pakistan got the nuclear bomb, there was some discussion in the US over whether the US should supply what's called permissive action links, which are basically coded locks on nuclear bombs, to make sure that not everyone can. So if they get stolen by a militant group or someone, that they can't sort of detonate these bombs without having the codes. And there was some, I think, controversy at the time, in the early 2000s, over whether that would be like giving these types of locks to Pakistan, if that's like promoting, or if that's like rewarding their proliferation in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But in the end, actually, I believe that the US did supply this technology on the grounds that, well, if you're going to operate it, it's better that you operate it safely. And there are a few voices in the US right now. So Richard Danzig had this report on technology roulette, where he basically calls for this, saying that it's in the national security interest of the United States to cooperate on at least safe deployment of these systems with other states. So yeah.
I have an anecdote related to the same, and that was I flew from Hainan in China to Fuzhou with my wife 3 years ago or something like that, and we on the same plane there was an American soldier in what looked like full uniform, and he was there for some kind of knowledge sharing with the Chinese military. There is some kind of bilateral military cooperation between the United States and China, and where people try to learn about each other in order to defuse tensions, I guess. So that was just an anecdote.
Right.
There's
also. Oh, sorry.
No, so
there was a recent there's a recent report, I think, by the Center for New American Security, which also sort of deals with Chinese strategy on AI, and actually, quite reassuringly, it appears that the Chinese are themselves concerned about the risks from accidental escalation. So that if we put AI in every sort of weapon system or components, that is going to lead to opportunities. So actually, and again, as you say, there's some lessons for optimism. There might also be many lessons for pessimism, but it is reassuring to see that at least parts of the U.S. and Chinese national security establishment take these problems seriously.
Okay, great. Robert, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, hang on just a minute. Sorry, I have to switch out my audio. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, sorry. My question was just about learning from the early history of nuclear weapons. I was wondering if you thought about, and I'm afraid I haven't been able to read the article this time, so this may be addressed in the actual original work. But the things that have changed between then and now in terms of the way that we, as a society, make our political decisions and receive and communicate our information and that kind of thing. I wonder if it still works the same way, or if there have been if those changes have had an effect on the way that this kind of thing works with an epistemic community.
So you mean in terms of information technologies in general, how that shifts how communities can advocate or shape norms?
Right. I feel like that's
so there
quite
is,
different than it was in the 40s.
Oh, sorry?
I feel like that is now quite different from how it was in the 40s and 50s. And I was wondering if you thought about the effect that might have.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, and there's some interesting work that looks at how this is in the context of treaty formation, or which used to be the sort of behind closed door of sort of well, in the Cold War you get the superpower diplomats, and they have this conference, and then especially in sort of the more recent years in the Ottawa Mine Ban Treaty, or the Paris Accords, the Paris Treaty as well, where you see a much larger role for civil society. Well, both reflecting a general sort of shift in how much of a voice they have in international affairs, but also you basically get a much more live audience of sort of the public, so that you're in your fourth day at a climate conference and you don't have something to show for it yet, and so that creates more direct pressure. I guess so. To apply it to the case of AI and sort of military, one problem might be that it does make it more difficult to get a sufficient amount of sort of cohesion amongst an epistemic community of experts. One thing you could still see, though, is that on certain topics. So this is maybe you saw this something similar during the J5+1, the nuclear Iran deal, where if you have a certain topic that is fairly sort of narrow, so this is basically about Iran not making nuclear weapons. It didn't say anything about their broader sort of political interference. So you have a fairly technocratic topic that maybe sort of stays below the radar of sort of, this is killer robot. So I could imagine that if you have a discussion over cyber warfare systems, or over something like AI-enabled ships or sensor systems that can help you find nuclear missile submarines. I mean, naval sensors is not something that gets people out of bed in the morning to this is something terrible, like a killer robot that we protest. But it is something where if the US believes that it can now detect all of China's nuclear submarines, it could be quite destabilizing. And so I guess there are sub-applications of AI to military roles where you could be able to insulate that from sort of misrepresentation or broader applications. I mean, and also it's sort of important to flag that in the paper I look at sort of a wider scope of AI uses in the military that could be problematic, but there are of course many uses of AI in armies or on the battlefield that are not necessarily problematic from either an ethical, legal, or safety or strategic stability standpoint. I mean, there's work on using it to optimize medevac or sort of medical care for soldiers, and that doesn't seem problematic in the slightest. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah. I feel like with this kind of thing, it might be useful to. I guess I'd want to talk to a historian, because it feels like quite a deep question from that perspective. But it does seem like there's definitely lessons we could learn. Thanks.
Okay, then the next question is from Ali. We can't hear you, Ali.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay, so I'm sorry if my question is a little ill-formed, but you mentioned AI in the military being something that's quite tightly coupled, and you contrasted this to the case of nuclear weapons, where you said that there would be less slack in and I was wondering, it seems like for nuclear missiles, if one thing goes wrong somewhere, that would surely affect everything else. And the pressure of the dangers of not reacting would imply that you would want everything to be as tightly coupled as possible. And I'm not really sure how AI would be more tightly coupled. I can see how it could be much more complex and you could get a lot more things going. But that feels like it's morely just because AI is much more widespread and varied. So I suppose it's just a question of why is AI, military AI, why would it be more tightly coupled than nuclear weapons?
All right, yeah, that's a good point. So I think within the sort of literature on normal accidents. Incidentally, they're called normal accidents because, and it's a really badly named concept, but the idea in the theory by Charles Perrow is that you get these technologies, and he studied nuclear reactors, and we get a meltdown or a major disaster, and in advance it looks inconceivable, and in retrospect, everyone's like, well, how could we have predicted this? And the point of his theory was to say, and of his name was to say that, well, you've set up your technology or your system in such a way that a disaster, well, it might not be predictable, but it was inevitable. So there would have been error cascades that sooner or later you would not see them coming, or you could not intercept them. And so his point was to say these accidents are really sort of bizarre or strange to us, but they are a part of the quote-unquote normal functioning of the system. And that's why he calls them normal accidents, even though it's a very confusing term sometimes. And in that discussion, you can have systems that are hugely complex, but that have very slight or very loose slack. And so one example is what they call like a university administration that sort of assigns classes to people, and it might not be clear how it does that. And but it doesn't have a lot of slack because the decisions aren't implemented so quickly. So I might get told a month in advance that, oh, you're going to teach these classes, and if there's been an error or a system has crashed or something, we can realize that there's an error, and we can intervene, and we can stop the next domino from falling before it falls, because there's so much time. But as you start going towards systems that start triggering the next element in a shorter time frame, you start getting these normal accident dynamics. And that time frame can be sort of several hours, as in the case of several industrial accidents or nuclear reactors. So those nuclear reactors, even though at some point people started being able to sort of figure out something was going wrong, they couldn't isolate the cause of the error quickly enough to stop the next domino. So then even if the system reacts within a few hours, you already get normal accidents. the case of nuclear weapons, you get these dynamics where there's a space of tens of minutes. So okay, we in the was it the late 70s, NORAD, the sort of the U.S. sort of Central Aerospace Command, had a number of cases where a computer error or a false training tape sent out a false nuclear war warning, and then basically they only had a number of minutes by which to detect the false error before protocol demanded that they should have launched a counterstrike. And so when I sort of write that AI or military AI systems will have a shorter coupling, I guess that's talking about, well, I guess it's talking about systems that, since they're digital, react or process or sort of carry out reactions even quicker than sort of a human organization that works with a incoming launch order. And of course, it's not. I mean, not all systems, okay, not all military systems will be set up to have such short slack, and not all military systems or AI systems need to be set up to have such short slack. So you could think of the difference between a cyber warfare system that does sort of an automatic hackback. So if it detects a threat, it automatically intervenes to shut it down. Between a system that is more sort of advisory and sort of says that, okay, in the last 24 hours we've been hacked from the source. Are you aware of this? And so as long as there's not that much pressure, or so long as we can put a buffer, or what you might call a what's this phrase? So when there's forest fires and you want to stop a fire from spreading, you dig this ditch between rows of trees, and that a fire break. Yeah, so something like that, where we can install that in the organization, either in the technology or in the organizational structure, that can at least slow part of the interaction if speed of reaction is not needed.
Then, so I see how that holds true, and I certainly understand how, if it's something like an AI is planning, is in control of military planning or resources, that could happen on very short timescales. But is there anything similar in terms of being an existential threat that could occur with military AI? Is it possible that you could get something that is immensely damaging all across the globe? I do see how it can occur on smaller scales or in limited areas. Is there anything more widespread, or do you suspect that it could occur?
So there's two answers to that, and one is that in many cases this will likely not rise to the level of an existential or even a global catastrophic threat. There's actually a paper that I'm sort of co-writing with someone that sort of looks at this question of, like, well, could lethal autonomous weapon systems, or like the killer robots, is there any way that conceivably ever be even a global catastrophic risk? And there's basically, it doesn't seem a clear way of making that argument unless you start to sort of involve bioweapons. But in that case, it's the bioweapons which are really the agent that you're concerned about. But the other argument, I mean, there are some projects right now, I think it's CSIR and elsewhere, that look at how AI systems could interact with nuclear command and control. So either if you think about spoofing or getting the appearance of an incoming sort of nuclear strike. I mean, and then of course the argument basically reduces to nuclear weapons being a existential or at least a global catastrophic risk, and AI being one way of triggering an exchange. But I don't, at least, I mean, and this is of course the interesting question, because I could see a strong argument for narrow AI systems being susceptible to normal accidents, but then in many cases, indeed, their failure can be like damaging. So in the sense of, say you've got a worst case and every autonomous weapon you have launches all their missiles at the closest target, but then still, I mean, there's no way for them to refuel or restock or get more ammunition without sort of human input. So that's sort of bad, but it's not catastrophically bad. So, and conversely, if you're talking about something like a general AI, it's less clear if that went wrong. It doesn't seem maybe right to describe that as a normal accident. Although that's actually an interesting question. I haven't thought about that very deeply. To what extent the normal accident paradigm could be meaningfully applied to something like AGI or superintelligence. I'll have to think about that a bit better.
Okay, the next question is from me, where last time I came up with a suggestion for a variation of the concept of meaningful human control, where instead of focusing on killer robots, or maybe in addition to trying to ban killer robots, the military, the community of people who care about military AI, try to push the idea that just like we have a norm that say that I was just following order is not a legal defense, then we say that I was just following an AI is not a legal defense. So if you send a missile somewhere, you can't do that just because the AI tells you to do it. You have to. The AI must show you some pictures or some proof that there are some people who need to be killed there. So this kind of thing, which will prevent people from deploying AIs because they know that they will be held accountable for what the AI do, and they don't really know what the AI will do. Does that make sense? Is this a good idea? And how to figure out if this is a good idea?
So there's two sides to it, where I do think it would be an interesting paradigm for the community to explore, because it would be sort of a fresh way of framing some of the, if not, so both legal or underlying that, sort of the ethical debates over, how you as an operator react or pertain to the system. I guess there's two. I mean, one concern with this is that they've had this argument over what's called a moral crumple zone, where you get there is a human operator, but they are basically there, or even if not sort of intentionally, but basically they always end up taking the blame because they're the last person who touched it. I mean, normal accident theory also often looks at how the human operator gets blamed because they're the most obvious person to blame, and you then get setups where often the human soldier ends up taking the fall, even though they are in a situation where where there's sort of nothing for them to do except sort of trust the system, but where it was also inevitable the system would fail. Maybe you could extend this to more something like, so there's this legal concept of command responsibility, where indeed as a commander, if I send soldiers into an area and they commit war crimes or they or something like that, then I am responsible for that on account of sending the soldiers there and knowing the risk that they might engage in that. You could try and apply something like that in the context of military AI systems, sort of that, okay, if they go, so you tell the soldiers to deploy an AI system in a certain area, and or to interact with it, and then understandably the soldiers will have to will follow the recommendations of the AI system because there's no clear way or good way for them to second guess it. But then if something goes wrong, as a commander, I'm responsible for that. Although, yeah, it would be interesting to see. The other side of this coin, of course, is that, I mean, and this is sometimes interesting where the military does actually like to keep control over its weapons. And this is one, I mean, there's a discussion in the debates over bioweapons that certainly there are a number of states in sort of the last so many decades that have pursued bioweapons, but at the same time sometimes militaries don't like them in the sense that they don't give them the same degree of granular control over a battlefield, and you can accidentally get sort of like, oh, your own population gets infected. And so similarly, militaries do actually like to have a high degree of reliability or reliance on their systems. And so, I mean, DARPA in the US is actually funding this whole explainable AI program. And there is I forget which paper this was, but anecdotally, I recall a paper that dealt with the discussion over, like, okay, if you're intelligence analysts, I think they were surveying intelligence analysts and asking them, okay, you can either get a system that has a 70% accuracy rate, and it explains how it comes to its decision, or you have a system that has a 95% accuracy rate, but it's completely opaque. Which one, like, if either system recommends something like, oh, we anticipate a regime collapse in Iran, which recommendation will you take to your boss? And generally, it appears that the intelligence experts prefer the more explainable system, even if it's less accurate in general, because that allows them to cover their bases. But I guess you could see something. So the I was just following an AI is not a legal defense. I guess you might see something like that applied if there are very major sort of atrocities. I mean, that was the whole sort of background of the I was just following orders not being a defense during the after the Second World War. Yeah, I guess it would have to come down on how egregious are the sort of the bad results. So if it's like, oh, I knew that there were lots of villages in this area and there's no reason for there to be a missile base, but the AI told me there was a missile base there, so I chose to nuke the whole area. That, of course, is very disproportionate and seems like you really shouldn't have trusted the orders of the AI, but there might be more fake cases.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Then we have a question from Carolina.
Yeah, I was wondering, considering the characteristics of AI, what kind of, in the area of international law, what kind of regulation model would you propose for military AI or for AI in general? International organizations like European Union or United Nations, what is their role in your opinion? Do you think a convention, a treaty, like in the case of nuclear weapons, is a good idea or not? For example, taking into account that non-state actors can also have very they can use AI much easier than get uranium. Yes, that's my question.
All right, yeah, that's a good one. So, in terms of international law regimes, and there is actually there was recently this week a submission that I co-authored with some people at CSIR and FHI, which is basically a submission to the UN high-level panel on digital cooperation, where we actually explore a few of these questions. So I can maybe ask if we can send it around later. Institutional arrangement, whether by a international sort of AI research organization. I think one, there are institutional arrangements for AI more in general. I expect or that military AI sort of control might be in separate regimes. That could be either sort of bilateral, so that's sort of like within not sort of multilateral amongst all parties, but between two specific states. So you could see between China and the US perhaps an agreement to sort of, okay, we're not going to neither of us is going to develop systems that can detect nuclear submarines, and then that way we maintain deterrent stability. So that's similar to the anti-ballistic missile treaty that's discussed in a paper where, I mean, no one at the time, no one else besides the US and the Soviet Union was developing this. So they have a compact amongst themselves about restricting the development and deployment of these systems. You could think about a multilateral, so a treaty arrangement with sort of many different states that are part of that. There's something like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where okay, then if China and the US become so concerned about AI cyber weapons proliferating to many small states, to a degree that so I mean, the argument is that currently only you have cyber warfare, but only a small number of states can really mount the truly powerful sort of state-based cyber attacks, what is called the advanced persistent threats. The one hypothetical could be that, okay, AI actually seems set to enable many more actors to carry out such cyber attacks. And if that becomes a seeming possibility, you could see something like the US and China trying to keep it under wraps with an arrangement where they say, like, okay, well, we'll try to help you with, we'll offer beneficial, we'll offer support for beneficial uses of AI. I mean, that's basically the deal that they struck with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Will help other countries with peaceful nuclear energy, so long as you agree not to make nuclear weapons. It's of course debatable how possible that is for AI, because AI is much more dual use, and it's arguably much harder in some cases to distinguish beneficial from non-beneficial uses. At the same time, in terms of the role of non-state actors, some of the arguments that are made by so in my paper and also some of the people that outside is that some applications of AI might still need, well, either a lot of hardware to train, or a lot of data, or a lot of what's called tacit knowledge by designers, by sort of AI experts, which is not something that maybe is that accessible to a wide range of sort of like terror groups. So there's certain types of military AI capabilities that may stay within the remit of states. But I'm not sure what the entirely best institutional solution is. I think if I have that answer, I have the argument in my dissertation, and so maybe hopefully I can tell you within a few years. But I'll post the link to the UN submission document in the chat if you'd like to look at it later.
Okay, then we have Ali. I think that will be the final question. I need to look at the time, but I think that will be the final question.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. So I just wanted to ask, have you found it, like, are you trying to collaborate and share ideas with people who are doing biological weapons research, as in how to prevent those things from falling into the wrong hands or sparking horrific accidents, etc.?
So there are people at the, so let's see. I've worked a little with, like Catherine Rhodes at Caesar and Gregory Lewis, and they specifically look at so bio risks and Gregory Lewis, and sort of the governance regimes, either for bioweapons or sort of new risks, so synthetic biology and risks emerging from that. I know there's also from a few years ago a paper by Grant, a emerging risks treaty. I think I'll look for it and see if I can find it, on basically proposing looking at global treaties or regimes to deal with emerging catastrophic or existential risks from basically, I think he looks at nanotech, biotech, and AI. It's not really my area of expertise, but it would be an interesting, I mean, having looked at sort of the nuclear weapon non-proliferation regime and that sort of, and that species, it would be an interesting and perhaps sensible next step for another paper. So yeah, I can keep you posted. Because in some ways it's also maybe a more natural analogy in terms of the accessibility to the than like nuclear weapons, which are constrained by uranium and then a lot of those consideration. But yeah, so I don't have a very good answer to that.
Okay, we are. I think we have used most of the time, so I would like to, from me and everyone in the reading group, say thank you very much to Mathias Maas. Thank you for coming and answering our questions.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been fun. So for there is one thing that I just really quickly we need to decide the people. Well, Mathias Maas, if you want, you can also. But otherwise, the next reading group meeting, when should that be? Should it be next Tuesday, or next Wednesday, or next Thursday? And as normally, we will do this by raising hands. Can everybody who wants Tuesday please raise their hand? And I can never figure out where it is.
Is it approval voting?
Sorry?
Is it approval voting?
Approval voting, yes. So we're voting everybody who votes for Tuesday. We have 2 people on Tuesday. 3?
Hang on, I'm having a hard time finding out how to get this to actually work. Here's the chat participants. Oh, there we are.
So 5 people are okay with Tuesdays, and then we'll have Wednesday. Please keep your hands raised or lower if you are not okay with Wednesdays. So Wednesday we are down to 4. Okay, and then Thursdays. Who is ready on Thursday? Well, it looks like it's going to be Tuesday. Unless a lot of people change right now. So the next meeting will be on Tuesday. And before we had planned on going on to the sequence on value learning by Rohim Shah, but I think we have this the second part of the critique of superintelligence that I would really like to finish up, and it was a great article. So I'm suggesting we do that next week. The critique of superintelligence. We kind of only did half of that, and I think it was really great. So that's why I think the last 3 parts: cosmic expansion, AI motivation, tractability of AI alignment, and expected value arguments. Any very, very strong objections to this?
I have no objections, but I was thinking maybe this has been raised already, but the new book that just came out on possible minds, you already considered it, or?
Ben Goertzel's, or which are you talking about?
No, it's this by John Brockman, but it's this collection of basically 25 AI luminaries or researchers or people giving their take on. Wait, let me just find it. And I think it has Jean Palin and a few others.
Yeah.
I just posted in the chat. So I know some people at the Governance of AI, the Center for the Governance of AI are currently reading that for their own book club. So it could be maybe down the line.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a bit more unclear how to do it with books because I'm not quite as fancy as with asking everybody to please buy this book in particular, because we don't really know if the book is good before or the article is good before we actually read it. But
Fair enough.
Seeing as a collection of essays, we could do 1 or 2 of the essays, right?
Yeah. But that will require a volunteer to buy the book, read through everything, and tell us which is good.
I'm currently listening to the audiobook, so I can keep you posted to if there's some that jump out at me.
Yeah. I guess in particular, the kind of thing that I'm mostly interested in, I'm personally really interested in things like critique of the book Superintelligence and figuring out whether, will computers become our overlords? So that's the kind of thing that...
If you scroll down, they have if you scroll down, they have small primers on all of the so you can see.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll read through this for next time and figure out. But for now, it will be the second part of the critique of superintelligence, and it will be on Tuesday, normal time. Everybody is welcome. Also you, Matthias, if you want to hear about that. But otherwise, I will just say thank you to everyone. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks as always, Soren, and thanks, Matthias, for joining us.
See you.
Thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.